Narayani asked me today to talk about Swami Kriyananda and to tell some stories about him. So I'll do that, and it won't be just stories for the sake of stories. It will be what many of us learned from him. As if some of you are new here, perhaps Swami Kriyananda ji was a disciple of Paramhansa Yogananda. He started Ananda village, which was a spiritual community that celebrated its 50th anniversary last year in California. And it's a really very powerful living example of how to live the spiritual life and how to actually live these teachings, because you can read about it in a book, which is very important. But then when you start seeing how people express it in their lives, in every moment of their lives, then you see actually how to do it. Because when you read it in a book, you start struggling, and you just are dealing with a lot of the same tests and challenges you've always faced. And how do you apply these sacred teachings into every aspect of our life? And so I had the great blessing of meeting Swami Kriyananda ji. I first met him in 1977 when I moved to Ananda village in California, and I spent the rest of my life serving him, serving Yogananda, living there, traveling also to Ananda all over the world, and now I live in India the last 5 years. And so when you're with a great saint, and who I consider also a master, you start to see how to live a spiritual life and what it really means. And part of what he gave all of us was how we can do it. It wasn't just, look at me, how I can do this. It was to inspire all of us to practice these things and to realize our own divine potential. He said something once that I just find to be so important and central to Ananda, to all of us, to everything that we do, why we do it. He said, inspiration, more than most people realize, is the highest secret of success. And so Ananda was founded on the basis of inspiration and inspiring others. And when people are inspired, they will do great things. I read a saying of a famous author who said that if you want to get people roused up to build a ship, you don't start by giving classes and instructions in shipbuilding. He said all you have to do is inspire within them the vision of the ocean and the vision of the vast seas and the inspiration of that. Then they'll figure out how to build a ship. You don't even have to have a class at that point. They'll figure it out, and they'll put out the energy to do what they're inspired and motivated to do. And that's really what Swamiji did for all of us, is that he lived a life of inspiration, and he inspired us, partly with the understanding that, yes, we can do this too. And that's how he inspired each of us, was by awakening that light within each of us and saying, yes, this same divine spark is within each one of you that is within me. And yes, you can do this, and we can do this together. And so this inspiration is something that we all, in a way, have a duty to share with others. And once you start becoming inspired by spiritual teachings, then yes, we do have a duty to express it as joy, as compassion, as kindness, as a hand lifting somebody up. And when we do that, we actually also grow even more because of that. And that's the other thing that he taught us, that to get involved and to start doing these things. Very early on, I saw and I had an experience with him. I was on his staff for several years. And Ananda Village was probably like the first startup, because when I moved there was maybe 40 people living there. The fire had just burnt down almost every building in the whole community the previous year. A lot of people had left because it was no longer a very comfortable way to live. My first year, I lived in a tree house that was smaller than this rug here up in the front, and just had clear plastic walls that was just this rolls of plastic. It wasn't even solid. And it wasn't a comfortable life, but it was an incredibly joyful life, because people look at it and say, well, that must have been hard. And it wasn't hard at all. Don't feel sorry for us who were living in tree houses, because there was so much joy and camaraderie, and Swamiji was there inspiring us and helping us. And just to see how he lived a spiritual life, because I was expecting a saint to be very in the spine, very sort of non-human in a way. and without sort of the human qualities that we all admire in people. But he had all these qualities to the nth degree because they were inspired by this divine energy and by divine joy and by this inspiration. And to give you an example of the way he lived, because seeing him in action every day really helped me to understand how to look at myself, how to give to others. And just one very small example. One day I was at the kitchen there at the Crystal Hermitage, which is this big compound where he lived, with a couple of the other people on the staff. And it was a very, very hot day. It was a heat spell at Ananda village, and it gets very, very hot there in the summertime. And he came up from his meditation early in the morning, all sweaty because it was so hot. And he just had this smile on his face of joy. And I assumed it was because he had a really great meditation or something like that. I just was kind of looking at him still that way. And he just said very quietly, he said, came from my meditation room, and I went in and I meditated for an hour, and I came out of the room and I looked at my watch, and it was only 5 minutes. It just seemed like an hour. It was so long, but it was only 5 minutes. And he was saying basically, I had a really bad meditation, but he was joyful and he was able to laugh about it. And he taught me that when I have a really bad meditation, which is often enough, not to get too down on myself, not to get too heavy about it, not to take it too seriously, because he would say, yeah, well then the next meditation will probably be better and can't get any worse than this. And he just had a sense of joy that was also manifested as a sense of humor. And so he really taught me how to do these things and not to take myself too seriously. And he didn't take himself too seriously, except he did as a disciple of Paramhansa Yogananda, who had this God-given mission to help others, just as all of us do, really, in the end. But in terms of his personality and himself, he was very childlike in certain ways, which I'll talk about in another minute. But he was also incredibly dynamic and creative. I was on his staff when we built this whole Crystal Hermitage with gardens and buildings, and after all the construction was done, which I was on the crew that helped build it, he asked me to stay and do some secretarial work for him and work in the gardens there and do a little bit of everything. And as these grounds were starting to be coming up, we realized that it needed income to help support a staff and everyone, because he wasn't going to just support everybody because he didn't have the money to do that. So we needed to have a fundraising event. And to show you how dynamic and creative he was, he wrote some chants and some songs. And one of the chants that he recorded and wrote and created at that time was this one that I just sang here, "When I awake, I'll see thy face." And then he recorded them, and then he gave us the recordings, and this was all in like a week's period. And that Friday there was going to be this big fundraising concert. And my wife and I, she was on the staff also at that time, and we had to make copies on cassette tapes. It was the days of cassette tapes. And we had about 3 days to make hundreds of copies, covers, put them all together. It wasn't like we had a company doing this, it was us, it was only us. And so all night long, we had this machine that would make copies in real time. It wasn't like it was this high speed, but it would make 3 at a time. So every 20 minutes, all night long, one of us, we'd sleep in the dome there at the Crystal Hermitage. We'd wake up, put in 3 new cassettes, put them in the boxes, lie down for 10 minutes, get up again. All night, night after night for about 5 nights. During the day, I was also the gardener, so I was digging up the ground, putting in plants. Everyone was beautifying the place and decorating it. And then Friday night came, and it was about 150 people came. And there we were, looking all polished behind the desk, taking money and selling these beautiful cassette tapes. And if a visitor came by, they would have thought, this is a really professional operation here. Look how polished these people are, and everything is just so calm and together. And we were like sweating and just half falling asleep behind the counter. And it was a joy, creativity, enthusiasm, energy, sharing, camaraderie. It wasn't hard work. It was just a lot of fun. There was just a lot of laughter. And he taught us that's how you live the spiritual life and you follow the spiritual path, with creativity, most of all with inspiration, also with selflessness and giving, sharing that joy with others, because that's all he ever, in a way, when he was with people, he was sharing inspiration and joy with everybody. He was also very childlike, though, because we see him, he wrote all these really incredible books full of great wisdom, but he was also just a child of Divine Mother. And I'll read something that he wrote right that time when we were working on this. Because he would also challenge us to be very creative. And during that time, he wanted to be more quickly able to print and publish books. And Ananda used to have a printing press, and it was one of these gigantic printing presses that was like half the size of half this room in size. But we had sold that, and he wanted to move more quickly. He couldn't wait for things to happen. He wanted to charge ahead. And so he bought a printing press they were starting to have these high-tech ones that were, maybe about this big. And he had my wife, who didn't know what a printing press even was, learn how to run this printing press with big rolls of black ink and everything. And she'd come all with ink all over, because when the printing press failed, which the guy who trained her said, yeah, it fails sometimes, and there's going to be black ink everywhere, all over you, all over the house, which there was. But Swamiji would write the book, and within a day, he would have her printing the book. And the next day, we would be binding it ourselves there in the same place where we did the cassette tapes. And we would be selling these books. And it was just so dynamic and so creative, and again, so joyful. But he was also very childlike. And this one book that he wrote at this time was a children's book. And he was asking my wife to come and read it and just give him feedback on it. But then he wrote, he said, and I still have this note from an old typewriter, but he filled in some of the words with his own writing. And he said, and, well, I really am a child at heart before God, though few people know it. At Ma's ashram, Ananda Ma, who he was very close to, I was known as her Choto Chele, little child. And he also had that side of him. And again, he was showing us, don't take yourselves too seriously. In the end, you're a child of God before the Divine Mother. That's who and what we are. And yes, we do these outward roles. He was, quote, a spiritual teacher, lecturer, famous author, founder of communities. But in the end, he was really only a child before Divine Mother, before God. And he also understood that he had to share that with others, because how we act and how we touch others, it really has a great effect, way more than we can ever understand. We would watch movies with him sometimes, and he always liked movies that had some sort of inspirational message, or not in a profound way, because I think his favorite movie, which people who were at Ananda for many years would kind of go over there knowing that they were going to watch the movie Bambi for the 10th time, and they just weren't real excited about watching it, but they were watching it with Swamiji, and there would be a lot of joy and enthusiasm. But there was this movie that I was watching with him. The actor was Danny Kaye, who was a famous actor way, way back. And in this movie, there was a funny scene. They did it very humorously. And Swamiji was watching it with humor and joy, but there was also a real instruction anytime you were with him. In this one scene, there's a guy who's kind of the head of the police in this small town. And so his boss comes in, the mayor, yells at him, hits him in the face in anger, and storms out. And so this guy gets really angry. And his assistant is over here, and he grabs his assistant, starts yelling at him, and hits him in the face. The way they do it is very humorous. It's not mean or anything in the movie. We were all laughing. And so his assistant storms out the door and kind of looks around for someone who's beneath him. And he sees the office peon, who's just the lowest person there. And he yells at him and hits him in the face. And they don't, it's not really violent or anything, but it's just very funny. And then he storms out onto the street. And it's like he's the lowest of the low. But then this beggar stumbles into him, and he sees his opportunity. So he hits the beggar in the face. So the beggar stumbles out in the street, and it's like, now what do I do? And there's this goat that walks by, and he hits the goat and just goes on his way. And what it taught me was that any action that we do with kindness or love or with anger or with hate, it really has a ripple effect. And you see this with Swami Kriyananda, that the effect that he had really has touched millions because he did it with so much energy. And the effect and the fruit of it is kindness that you see here. I mean, people, Ananda people, one of the hallmarks, and he said this one time, he said in India, one person came who was a spiritual teacher. He said, you know, I always know when I see an Ananda person. And the teacher was not affiliated with Ananda. He said, you people are all so kind, you're all so humble, childlike, and joyful. And these things pleased Swamiji more than anything because they were a confirmation that his actions and his giving and his touching 1, 2, 5, 10 people, it was spreading out. And you know, rather than hitting someone on the face, it was touching them with kindness and spreading and spreading. And this is Ananda Mumbai here. And you know, people sometimes kind of say, well, I wish I knew Swami Kriyananda or Paramhansa Yogananda. But in fact, you do. Just by being here and relating to Shorjo and Ariani and others here who have been with Ananda, you see that kindness, you see that joy, you see the dynamic creativity, and you're meeting Swami Kriyananda. And because he would say that he's not a person, he just really tried to separate the personality from what he had to give. And he sometimes said that he saw Swami Kriyananda, the person, as an event for which he was responsible for this event of Swami Kriyananda. And he didn't identify with the personality at all, because he identified more with the divine flowing through him and his God-given duty to awaken that divinity in each one of us, in each one of you. And that's really what working with inspiration is about, and inspiring others, is to recognize that divine spark in all souls. And that's what he did. He saw that in us. He saw the potential in each person, and he awakened that potential by feeding it, by encouraging it, by supporting it. And so if you want to practice and live these teachings, we meditate, we energize, because when kindness is just a sentiment, it doesn't have much energy. But when kindness has energy behind it, then it becomes a very dynamic power that really has much more potential to really spread and to touch many, many souls. But it's also in our own lives, with our jobs, raising our families. Whatever we do it with that creative inspiration, dynamic energy, new ways, doing new things in new ways. We have this monastery that we started about 1.5 years ago. The monks were living in Pune. We shifted to Kandala. And it was time to really do this in a new way, and in the way that Swamiji talked about starting a monastery, which was more like a hermitage in a way, separate from society. He said, Yogananda told him, I want the monks to live separately from other people, from the others. But it's not a place to escape. It's a place to really have, again, dynamic creative businesses and energy, also deep sadhana and inspiration. But if inspiration is kind of the guiding force behind everything, you'll find that creativity comes, you'll find that joy comes, you'll find that you are given the power to overcome tests. Because his life, you know, his life was full of tests. He saw a doctor somewhere, not even near the end of his life, you know, maybe halfway through, who looked at his medical records, which was like, you know, a big binder full of all these surgeries and all these different things. And he couldn't believe this guy was alive, much less really joyful. And so life isn't about avoiding tests or escaping them. It's about getting through them with this joy, with this inspiration, with this kind of energy that he showed all of us that we had the potential to do this. Let's see, I also just want to share how individually he greeted us, welcomed us, fed us, and how he inspired us. Because when you inspire someone, if you want someone to do something, if you're in an office, you're people's boss, yeah, you can scold them and order them around, and he never did that, ever. He just inspired and loved, and he inspired people to really follow him to the ends of the earth. That was the kind of motivation that he inspired just from willingness and from joy. And one time I was living at a community that Ananda had just started. He asked me to go move to this community with just 2 or 3 others. It was many hours away driving from Ananda village. And this was about a year or so after I had moved there, and I was just really missing Swamiji, and I really wanted to see him. But we didn't have cars or anything like that in those days, so traveling was very difficult, and we had very little money. But he was doing a big weekend program at Ananda village, and no one else was going, and no one had a car or a ride. And so I took a bus part of the way to Ananda with the intention to hitchhike the rest of the way, even though Yogananda told his disciples don't hitchhike, but I had no choice. So I took the bus, I got out of the bus in this small town. It was midnight on a Friday night, which is a really bad time to hitchhike. There's antisocial elements, drinking and stuff, and so I didn't hitchhike that night. So I just slept right there, and it was the bus parking lot. I was the only one dropped off. And so I laid down in the parking lot on the asphalt and put my head on the cement curb, and just had a very nice, joyful sleep. And this is sort of an aside, but I woke up, and this town has a very weird feature, which someone built these gigantic, like 50-foot tall statues of Native American women, like 3 of them. One has a bow and an arrow, the other one has a spear, and they don't have any clothes on. And it's just, I woke up and I opened my eyes and I saw, this is what I saw when I opened my eyes. It's like, where am I? What's happening here? It was very surreal. But I finally realized what was going on, and I hitchhiked to Ananda village. And I got there just in time to wash up and go into the temple, where there was probably about 150 people there. And I was in the very middle of this big crowd. And just after about 15 minutes of speaking, Swamiji just saw me there. And he didn't know I was coming or anything. I hadn't told anybody. And he just said, "Oh, Dave, how nice that you could come here for this." And just, there was this individual relationship that really Divine Mother and God has with all of us. And people sometimes see God as impersonal and vast. And there's a sort of jnani yogi approach to that. But if God is infinite and omnipresent, God can be infinitely impersonal, but also infinitely personal and individual, and relate and understand each one of our own needs, who we are as an individual. We are the children. We are the individual children of the Divine Mother. And just because the Divine Mother had so many children doesn't mean that she doesn't remember and know and love each of us individually. And that's also what he was trying to show each one of us, that we, in our uniqueness, even though the God is vast and infinite, God is also personal and has this way of relating to us. So he was not impersonal in that sense of just seeing a vast sea of faces and giving a lecture and then disappearing and going off stage. And so this was his way of teaching us, showing us how to live, how to love, how to serve. I'll just end with, there's a photo some years ago I took of Swamiji, and it was, I don't see the photo here, but it's this photo. What's that? It used to be here. And it was a photo that was chosen for the cover of this book about his life, where he's pranaming to the side, and you see him in this blissful look on his face. And that really demonstrated, the title of the book is A Life in God, is what it is. And that blissful look on his face, I was sitting near him on an Easter Sunday, I think 2011, and I just snapped that picture. I took 3 photos. I wrote a blog about this and tells the story of this photo, and I never would take photos of him just because I didn't want to bother him. I wanted to be more inward near him. But that day, for some reason, I took my camera there and took 3 photos. 2 of them were out of focus because the autofocus captured the background, so he was out of focus, which is what I realized autofocus really means out of focus. Now is what I understand. But this one photo was just the perfect photo of him that was really chosen as the photo to put on this cover of a book of photos. There it is. Why don't you bring it up here, because it depicts this joy that he had. And the setting of this photo is, it was Easter Sunday, and the reading was being read from the Gita of Krishna saying, bow down to me, worship me, adore me. And as that was being read out loud by Nayaswami Devarshi, this was Swamiji, that was the look of bliss of, this is how you worship, how you adore, how you give yourself to God. And so in a way, this photo demonstrates, again, how we do these things, the joy, the freedom, the love that we give to God, to each other. And this, in a way, photo demonstrates a life in God and how you give yourself to God. And so spend time here, for those of you who are here for the first time. Spend time with Shurjo, Narayani, others who have been here for some years, and you'll get to meet Swami Kriyananda ji. But more importantly, you'll get to see how to live this life. It's not just meditation and grim determination. Yeah, we have to have willpower and energy and motivation, but really it's about this divine inspiration that is really not just because we have that spark within each of us, but that inspiration is kind of like the saints, the masters, all of us, each other. We've learned to look at that spark in each other and blow on it and make it start to come up into flames, and really have the power to also then touch other people with that inspiration and joy. So as disciples of Yogananda, or just followers of any spirituality, this is our divine, I wouldn't even call it a duty, because that sounds kind of grim, like I have this duty to do this. It's actually just inspiration and joy has this, it's infectious. It just wants to spread and expand and touch others. And so be aware of that. And the more conscious we can be of that, the more we can help others, and the more free we will become in ourselves. So may their joy be with us always, and may Swami Kriyananda guide us always with that. Om.